for starters, who are you?
Well, I'm Barbara Roden, and I'm the editor of the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal newspaper, and it's a one-person newsroom. There are a lot of those still in BC, so it keeps me busy.
When was the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal established?
Well, the journal was established in 1895. It was called the BC Mining Journal, but it's always been based out of Ashcroft. And in 1898, it moved from its original premises on Railway Avenue to a custom-built building on 4th Street in Ashcroft, and it is still based out of there today. Moved in there in 1899, so it's been there for 120 years. It changed its name to the Ashcroft Journal at that point, but because it's been going since 1895, it is the longest continuously published weekly newspaper in British Columbia.
Did you always have a passion for journalism?
I've always loved writing. It wasn't until I got into high school that I realized that journalism was the way to go, and I actually got a journalism degree from Kwantlen College, and then life took me in a different direction, and it wasn't until relatively recently that I came back to the field of journalism. So I'm the poster child for never give up on your dreams.
When and how did you get involved with the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal?
Well, in 2012, the journal was looking for a circulation manager, which is someone to work in the office, and I applied. And I got the job largely because of my journalism background, because they were looking for someone who could replace the then editor, Wendy Coomber, when she went on holidays in the summertime. And so having someone in the town who already knew the community, knew the region, had connections, knew the stories, that made a lot of sense. It was interesting for me because when I learned journalism back in the 80s, it was physical paced up, and computers were just starting to come in. And when I started editing the journal in 2012 during the summertime, it's all InDesign, it's all Photoshop. So I had to learn some new ways of doing it, but the actual process of laying out a newspaper, what it looks like, hadn't really changed very much, I found, so that was good.
At what point did you take over as editor of the journal?
I became full-time editor in February of 2016 when Wendy retired. I was offered the position, and so I made the leap from just doing it for 4 weeks in the summertime to doing it 52 weeks a year.
What are some of the duties that you have on a weekly basis?
Weekly basis, there are some stories that I cover fairly regularly. Local news briefs is something that I started doing for those community items that aren't quite large enough for a story of their own but are still important for people to know about. So I try to do that on a weekly basis. And even though I like to think it reads fairly quickly, it takes a long time to pull all that information together. So that's probably the thing I do regularly that takes me the longest amount of time. Covering organizations, community groups, I mean, that's a huge part of one-person newsrooms that are serving small rural communities. Is you're not necessarily covering the big federal stories or international stories. It's very local, but it's the stuff that would not be covered anywhere else. You know, the Vancouver Sun, the Globe and Mail, the National Post, they're not going to cover the Ashcroft Fall Fair or the Clinton Fall Fun Fest or Desert Days in Spence's Bridge. So that's, I think, where the value of community newspapers really comes in, is providing that coverage that you're not going to get anywhere else.
When one paper is done, what do you do next?
It's every week when I finish putting together that week's paper, which is usually on a Tuesday, I have a moment of not quite panic, but I think, okay, what's going in next week's paper? And you know, I always find enough. There's always even more than enough. Sometimes I have to hold stories or photos over for a couple of weeks because there's just so much happening and I only have so much room. But when I've got all my stories, my pictures, everything assembled for the paper for that week, I tell people it's like a jigsaw puzzle, because I get my dummy, which shows me what space I have on what pages, and I've got all these stories. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle, but there's no design on the box. It's up to me entirely to decide how that's going to look, where stories are going to go, where the pictures are going to go on the page, what the headline is going to be, because that's the beauty of being a one-person newsroom. I get to take the pictures, I get to write the cut lines, the stories, I get to write the headlines, everything. So you have to be a generalist. It's like being a general physician rather than a surgeon. You have to be able to do a lot of different things. So it can be challenging, but it's also a lot of fun.